The objective of the campaign is, of course, to elevate the voice of the mayors, and we're glad, Mr. Constantin, that you joined the coalition, to elevate the voice in the global policy debate on inequalities, because so far they were, of course, very vocal, but they were not involved in this debate at the global level. So it's really the very first initiative that is going to target this objective. And of course, the objective is also to develop a common policy agenda. At the campaign, at the launch of the campaign in New York in last March, all the mayors, they signed on something that we call the New York Proposal. Here you have this proceedings publication, which is displayed there, but it's available online, and you have the New York Proposal. Actually, it identifies several policy areas that we'll consider are crucial to promote inclusive growth in cities. First, education and skills. Second, labor markets. Third, housing and transport. And fourth, infrastructure and public services. So today, in our discussion, we will address some of these issues, and I'm very pleased to see that we have different representatives from different sectors, private, research, philanthropic, and public sectors, because of course, it's, if we want to address inequalities in cities, it's not just a question of political leadership of mayors, which is essential, but we need to engage all type of stakeholders. So first, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Do Constantin, who is the executive of King County in Washington State. Now he's in his second term. Do is focused on fighting inequalities and combating climate change. These two issues actually are the heart of the OECD work in general, and within the context of the campaign, we will have a close look at the nexus between climate and inclusiveness, because of course we know that there are strong synergies, but there might be also some trade-off. For instance, when you develop an eco-neighborhood, we know that it can lead to gentrification, so it's not obvious. Next, we have Peter Scheer, who is the head of corporate responsibility and head of the Washington, D.C. region at JP Morgan Chase & Co. Peter has led a number of initiatives to close the skills gaps and to make cities more competitive, including the Global Cities Initiative with the Brookings Institute, which aims to boost U.S. metro regions' engagement in global market. We are pleased to have Rodney Simpson, who is the chairman of the Opportunity Hub and chief of Diversity and Inclusion Initiative at Take Square Labs in Atlanta, which is a network of technical startup founders, educational institution, industry experts, and enterprises working together to develop big companies. The mayor of Atlanta, actually, Kasim Reed, was one of our founding champion mayor. Rodney has been leading work on inclusive innovation, bringing disadvantaged groups into coding, innovation, entrepreneurship, and investment and opportunities. And of course, last but not least, we have Cecile Bedor, the Executive Vice President of Greater MSP, the Regional Economic Development Partnership of Minneapolis-St. Paul. She has extensive experience in housing, redevelopment, and urban planning, which are among the key levers that we have identified to promote inclusive growth in cities. We are also very glad that she represents the city of Minneapolis, because Mayor Betsy Hodge is another founding champion mayor, and she has been actually very, very active in this area. So briefly, let me explain the format of this panel. We will have 3 rounds of questions. We will begin with one which will be quite generic. After these 3 rounds of questions, we will open the floor to Q&A to Q&A, and I think we will have also questions from the tweeters. Our time limit is very tight. Each panelist will have 2 minutes each to respond to each question. So I'm going to start our first round of questions, which will help to set the scene, why inclusive growth matters in cities. So the first question is to Do Constantin. King County has made significant progress toward inclusive growth in recent years, from transit expansions to low-income communities to early childhood education to paid leave. We'll get into the specifics of the policy soon, but can you start by explaining to the audience, in general terms, why you view inclusion of all your residents as a critical precursor to sustain economic growth?
Sure. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. And thank you for inviting me to sign on to the Inclusive Cities campaign. Mr. Secretary General, I did not realize that a Paris trip was part of the deal when I signed on, but I'm not disappointed. King County is a jurisdiction of 2.1 million people. City of Seattle is our county seat, but there are many cities that really make up the metropolitan area. And of course, Brookings has been great about helping frame up the discussion of the role of metropolitan regions in creating national and global change, and that is precisely what we are talking about here today. We have a really dynamic and technology-driven economy, a rapidly growing economy in our region. You may have heard of some of our companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing was born and still lives in our region. And each of these companies is creating enormous opportunity, but we also have widening disparities in our region. Since 2000, 96% of the new households created have household incomes of less than $35,000 or more than $125,000. Very little in the middle being created any longer. Why is that a problem? It breaks the deal we have with one another, that in America, if you work hard, you'll be able to succeed. It is bad for our economy. We have a consumer-based economy, and that by definition requires consumers. And when people do not have money to spend, our economy suffers as well. We need people who are able to make things. And the things we are making require a higher and higher level of educational attainment and training. And finally, we have the challenge of social cohesion as incomes pull farther apart. Fundamentally, we need inclusive growth because that ladder of success, the opportunity for everyone to succeed, requires that the city itself be a place where they can live, where they can access all that opportunity that's being created, and the predicates to participating in that opportunity, like education and training. I'm looking forward to talking about a couple of the ways in which we're addressing that challenge in our region.
Thank you very much, Joe. You mentioned something very important: inequalities is bad for the economy. I would like to acknowledge the presence of my colleague Monica Kisser, who is heading the work on inequalities at the OECD, and her directorate. They produce clear evidence that they have even calculated the cost for the economy of growing inequalities. So if you have any question, Monica is here to respond to this specific question. I would like now to turn to Peter Cheer. Similar question to you, Peter. JP Morgan has taken a significant role in several initiatives recently promoting inclusive growth, from workforce development to community building to financial literacy. Why has one of the world's largest financial institutions taken such an active role in this space?
I don't know, just a little cynicism in that. Why would a bank be doing this? The Secretary General, this is a big problem. And this is not just a theoretical problem. This is not something just interesting to get together in Washington to talk about. But, if the Secretary General talked about what business teachers taught us years ago about location, for those of us who didn't sleep through all of our philosophy classes, Aristotle said if you don't have a stable middle class, you can't have a stable political system. You can't have a stable democracy. And we have a very unstable middle class right now. You've got people who are feeling left out, feeling the system is not working for them, and you only have to look at the dysfunction in Washington. You look at, and this is not just a US thing. I mean, look at what's going on in the UK right now. European unity has been the key to peace and stability in a continent that had 2 world wars, and you're now looking at the trends that the UK could get out of it. It's not a theoretical thing. There are too many people who feel the system is not working for them. And as a result, our politics has become so polarized, and we can't do the things we need to do. We're not investing in education. We've got, half of our kids in inner city schools aren't graduating. We're not investing in infrastructure. Anyone try to take the red line this morning down here? Okay, we're not reforming the tax code, as the Secretary General talked about. We're not dealing with international trade, and how do we make sure that more people are brought into the global economy? And so you say, why does a large financial institution get involved? How could we not? I mean, the fact is, I would say from 2 perspectives. One, we have the view that if we have the resources and we have the expertise and we have the data and ability to make a difference, we have a responsibility to do that. But I would also say I think the business community has to recognize this is in our self-interest. It is not good for business to have people not working. It is not good for business to have communities and cities that can't compete in the global economy. And the flip side of that is if we're getting more people into the workforce and higher skilled jobs, if companies can expand, if cities can grow, that's a good thing for all of us. And I think that the business community has to recognize that this is in our self-interest to be able to be part of the solution to these challenges. So that's why we're doing this.
Thank you, Peter. Rodney Sampson. Rodney, you have discussed the concept of inclusive innovation as being the core to your work in Atlanta with Tech Square, the Tech Square Lab, sorry about the pronunciation, the French pronunciation, and Opportunity Hub. It's a topic that is very close to the OECD work. We have just produced a report called the Productivity Inclusiveness Nexus, where we look at how innovation can help combat inequalities, both on the side of consumers, of course, by giving low-income groups access to cheaper and improved goods and services, but also on the side of entrepreneurship by helping people to unlock their productive potential. For you, in concrete terms, what does inclusive innovation mean? And what can be done to help expand the fruit of entrepreneurship to a broader segment of the society, and in particular in Atlanta?
Sure. This will probably be the only time I read something, but I want to be really intentional about this response. For me, this is experiential. Inclusive innovation is a multifaceted construct that exists at the intersection of unrealized opportunity for all. And they're fully and openly embraced in every construct of society. It ultimately benefits the greater good of the planet, realized or unrealized. So what does this require, actually? And this is sort of a part of our work. It requires a consciousness of awareness. Minorities and women and immigrants suffer from intentional or non-intentional invisibility that is often met with tokenism. We've got to hack and disrupt this mindset. And it's going to require authentic inclusion. And just to be transparent, those who know our work, this inclusion must be adopted mostly by white males as allies in this work. We have a hashtag we use at Tech Square Labs that says all ideas matter. And then the third thing is realizing this untapped opportunity, whether it be increased return on investment or access to new customer biases. So how do we kind of bring that thesis to life? In Atlanta, we have been, over the last 4 years, very intentional about being outspoken about diversity and inclusion, but also ensuring that at every phase of the innovation, entrepreneurship, and investment ecosystem, there is representation. There's qualified technical representation. And so when you break down how these ecosystems are built from the idea to the exit, there's normally a lot of representation. When you look at those who are writing the checks and making the investments, their committees or their investment committees are not representative of the targets that they say that they want to actually invest in or help. So we've been intentional about curating those types of investments and spaces. You know, today we have 25,000 square feet of space near Georgia Tech, and it's probably, in our estimation, the most diverse and inclusive technology incubator on the planet. On one side of the space, you've got black, white, male, female, straight, gay, software engineers programming in Java, JavaScript, Ruby, Python, building and disruptive. And on the other side, you've got 15 to 20 disconnected youth who've been written off that are learning Java. You know, this is not just cute little stuff that, you know, ends up in corporate social responsibility reports. This is stuff where we're actually creating jobs and we're solving real problems. And so when you get early wins and successes, and, you know, money invested, jobs created, and then you start scaling that, you know, at a certain point, you start to develop a model. And from there, when you look at truly diversifying the innovation, entrepreneurship, and investment economy, you start to send the message that, you know, this is an investment thesis. Diversifying your innovation work, your entrepreneurship work, and your investment work is not altruism, but is it actually an investment thesis if return on investment or jobs created is your goal?
We will come back to you in the second round of questions, but I would be very interested to learn from you whether you have been able to measure and monitor this inclusion component of your program. I would like now to turn to Cécile. Cécile, you represent a regional organization, the Greater MSP, Minneapolis St. Paul, which is, again, a regional economic development partnership. And you have taken a cross-sectoral approach to advance inclusive growth by reaching out to public, private, and NGO sectors. The Secretary General this morning, he mentioned the case of the metropolitan region of Chicago that the OECD has studied some time ago. We have produced 20 or 25 metropolitan region and studies, but every time we are working with organizations like yours because it's very important to have this functional RM regional approach to the issue. Indeed, there are so many aspects to tackle this problem and so many organizations operating in the territory. So how did your organization begin?
Well, that's really hard in 2 minutes, but I used to work for Mayor Coleman prior to coming to Greater MSP, and during that time, we actually started working with the Brookings Institution on the regional approach to economic development. And we really realized that the only people who view the world through political boundaries are elected officials, but everybody else views the world regionally. So, for example, Minneapolis' greatest asset was St. Paul and vice versa. So there are a lot of assets in the region. And as you said, we had a lot of different organizations doing a lot of different things, talking to each other sometimes, and other times just parallel tracks around different economic development approaches. So our region came together and realized that we had a lot of assets to sell, and we really needed to take an asset-based approach to economic development. And in order to do that, we needed to do that together. So as we did our research, we found out that we were one of the few regions of our size that did not have a regional economic development organization that really was that one-stop shop for our businesses that were currently located in our region and for companies that were considering a move that hopefully we would get on the map. So in 2011, we launched, and it's been kind of an interesting road. It's been a real iterative process, I would say. We're a 16-county region, so we're rural, we're exurban, we're suburban, and we're very, very urban. We also are kind of unique in that we have 2 of everything. We have 2 cities, 2 counties, 2 chambers, St. Paul Port Authority, and us. We have about 3.4 million people in our region, and we're about the 48th largest economy in the world. So we have a lot to sell. So we got together, started our organization in 2011 with 2 people to do 3 major things. One is to tell our story, sell the region to site selectors and real estate decision makers across the country and across the globe. To take a look at our sectors of strength, and we have significant sectors of strength from med device, health and life sciences, to headquarters, et cetera, and to move those from great to greater, really. And then to really take a look at our strategy work. So what are the strategic issues that are really holding back growth in our region? So when we launched, we did the kind of easy stuff, which is marketing and branding. You know, there's traditional ways of doing that, and that continues to evolve, but we all kind of know how to do that. We did the traditional BI work, business investment, of going out to recruit companies to move here. And then really we're quite intentional about visiting the businesses that we currently had to make sure we kept them, and if they were contemplating growth, that we retained that growth. I think the tricky part of it was our 3rd bucket of work, which is the regional strategy. How do we identify what those strategic issues are, and how do we make sure that we're including the right people at the table? So in 2013, 2 years in, we were having a lot of conversations on our board, which is primarily made up of our local CEOs, a lot of Fortune 500s, president of the University of Minnesota, the president of the McKnight Foundation, and others, put together a task force to determine, to do more research on what our strategy should be. And we interviewed dozens and dozens of people to come up with what ended up being 1 piece of paper. So it wasn't a big plan. It's really literally a piece of paper that's got 3 buckets of work on it. One is to tell our story. The other one is to focus on talent. Focusing on talent in that we had heard anecdotally that we were having an issue with our talent pipeline. We needed to address that. And the other thing is to really do very intentional on our sector approach. So that sounds really easy, but that process was really messy because you ask a lot of questions as you dive into implementation of any kind of strategy of what people are doing and what's working and what's not working and what you can bring to scale and what you can't. And when you're asking people what's working and it may not be working, people are threatened. And if you're thinking about the resources that you have that aren't necessarily growing, but you need to figure out how to deploy them differently, all that is really scary. So I say that to say this is not easy work. It is not simple work. And I think the things that you've just described here are the same thing. There's a lot of players involved. And I think it requires us to be really intentional about who's out there over and above the usual suspects that we come in, that we normally engage. I think the other thing, too, that we've done, probably by default more than anything else, is we have thought about this. We haven't actually coined it as inclusive growth, but it's really been our approach. Equity has been a word that has been tossed around a lot lately. We lose people in our region when we use the word equity because it kind of denotes a fixed pie that gets redistributed. Where our vision is around growth and inclusive growth, that everybody can get behind that because everybody wants growth. And so growth in jobs, growth in capital investment, and growth in opportunities for everybody. So I think my 2 minutes are up, but I think that generally gives you an idea of where we've come from and where we're going. But I would say the process is going to continue to evolve as more players come into the partnership and we advance our work.
Thank you very much, Cecile. We're going to now start the second round of questions, which will address specifically the question of education and training, which are the most critical policy levers to promote inclusive growth. The first question to Do Constantine. The King County has been growing very fastly and strongly in your country, but the gain from economic expansion has flowed disproportionately to the top. With this in mind, you push through one of the most comprehensive early childhood development program in the country. Let me just give you a figure. Across the OECD, the US has the lowest share of 3 to 5 years old in early education programs. Tell us what your program entails, how you're funding it, and how you convince the voters of King County to support your idea.
So I view my job, first and foremost, as leading us toward that place where every person will have the opportunity to fulfill his or her potential. And there are a number of barriers that keep that from happening, and particularly in a place with enormously expanding opportunity in certain sectors, to have large parts of our population who are so far from being able to access that opportunity is an inexcusable failure by our political class as well as the community more broadly. So I visited the University of Washington's Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences. They're studying the development of the brains of very young children. And what I was able to see there in 3 dimensions is the effect of environmental factors in the brain development of children. And I realized that one of the things that we're failing to do is to make modest investments early to help ensure that every child gets the enrichment, gets the support that they need early on for that healthy brain development to happen, so that when they arrive at school, they are, in fact, better equipped to succeed and to be able to continue to succeed through life. So we set out to establish Best Starts for Kids. It is a $65 million per year annual investment by the voters of the county. 50% of that will go to enrichment for children under the age of 5, really from prenatal through age 5. And a lot of that, you think of home visitations, for example, but also screening for emergent challenges with kids. Then follow them through the school years and into early adulthood to continue to monitor for challenges and to help them overcome those challenges. We also invest in communities because investing in the kid is not very successful if the community is not able to support that family and child. And ultimately, I did this because we have been reactive. We run the justice system, and all of our money is going to paying for bad outcomes in kids' lives. And what we needed to do was carve out a little space to begin to invest in that infrastructure, that human infrastructure, that ultimately will allow these and their families to be able to get across that gulf and to access the kind of opportunity that's being created in our community. We got broad support across the county, including from the cities outside the city of Seattle, and the voters strongly embraced paying an additional property tax in order that they might be able to make this investment in our collective future. They understood intuitively that we were falling down on that and that we needed to do better.
Thank you very much. Next question to Peter. JP Morgan Chase has made a large bet on workforce development through the New Skills at Work initiative. You have mapped occupations that provide good wages and opportunity for advancement, and then found a new training partnership that would connect the dots between what training institutions provide and what employers and workers need to succeed. This work is happening across a dozen of cities. What are some early successes that you can share from New Skills at Work with us? And what are some of the challenges that remain?
Yeah, so let me just say that the reason we're focused on this, because I think the Secretary General said this, the county executive just said this. I think when we're talking about the disparity that exists, and this is clearly not just the U.S., it's all over the world, there's no one single answer, but I think you have to look at what our education and training systems doing, and the difference that will make in creating opportunity versus no opportunity is just enormous. And so we made a decision. We kind of stepped back about 4 years ago, and we have one of the largest corporate foundations in the United States, and frankly, we weren't spending the money very well, to decide where could we have genuine impact, what are issues that are relevant in cities across the world. And what we heard from mayors and governors literally across the world, from Asia, Latin America, all over the U.S., is the skills gap is a big problem. And we identified 3 things. One, cities by and large have not had the right data about what are the jobs that are actually being created in a given city. What are the industries that are going to be growing? Because it's going to be different. I mean, there'll be some commonalities. Healthcare is growing in most every city, technology, but in some places it's aeronautics, other places it could be the, food industry. So really getting the data to understand. And we've actually been working in about 130 cities across the globe right now, including now with the OECD in 3 or 4 European cities in South Africa, to really map what are the skills, what are the jobs that are being created, and what are the skills that are needed, to attain those jobs. And that I think has been very successful. And the reason it's been successful is because one of the challenges and opportunities we realize is people who should be talking to each other are not talking to each other. And this is a problem everywhere. The people doing the training and the people doing the hiring are not talking to each other. And there's this train and pray attitude, and we got to get people together, and rather than sort of getting people together around a theoretical conversation, we're getting people together around the data to really look at, okay, what do we need to do in this city? And we're actually now requiring, in terms of our funding, that all the right people be at the table. We want the educators, we want the politicians, we want the business community. And that unless you get all those people at the table, we're not going to provide the funding. And you know what? It's been a really great incentive. In fact, we now have a program that's an offshoot called New Skills for Youth, which is about getting career and technical education back into schools. And we have a competition. 40 states applied for grants. We've now given planning grants to 20 states, and we will provide several $1 million to about 10 states to implement the kind of skills education that we need in the schools. So really, really driving people together. And then the third thing is funding the right programs. I mean, the problem is there's so much money spread out all over the place. And I think, frankly, I apologize to anyone from the federal government, but I don't think the federal government's doing a very good job in terms of directing the funding to the right programs in the right places. And our hope is that if we can sort of get the data and get the focus and get the right people around the table, we can all drive funding to a place. And I think that's where we're starting to see some success, including in places like Detroit, where we're very active, where you're seeing growth, looking at where small businesses can create jobs. I mean, there's just a huge opportunity here, and I think this is, it's not a silver bullet to the question that went to the Director General, but at a time when there are 4 million unfilled jobs in the United States, 2 million in Europe, and these are not minimum wage jobs, we should be doing a whole lot more to get people trained and into these jobs and create the systems that will have pipelines for years to come.
Thank you, Peter. I'm trying to accelerate because we don't have much time. No, but that's very good. Very important what you mentioned. Rodney Simpson, you have been involved in skills development from a very specific perspective that is helping young people learn the technical skills and entrepreneurial capability to participate in Atlanta's startup ecosystem. From your experience, what is working in Atlanta and what more needs to be done to help young people from disadvantaged background and location? How can you help them to engage into the high-tech economy?
We approach the pain point. You know, there's the pain point that we're hearing about in the media and beyond is, you know, the lack of diversity in innovation, the lack of diversity in tech, whether that's the technical workforce, software engineers, early programmers, those who understand big data, machine learning, et cetera, or technical co-founders to invest in. So just like we look at any startup we invested or we start a startup, we first identified the problem, and then we started working on a minimal viable product. And that minimal viable product is called Code Start, hashtag Code Start. And Code Start is actually a collaborative, to Peter's point, with the Atlanta Workforce Development Agency, the Iron Yard, and employer partners. So our thesis of Code Start is that we can invest $50,000 in a disconnected youth, 18 to 24 years old. They don't have a college degree, but we can teach them Java or some other in-demand language so that they will have the employability of an early-stage engineer. So we're teaching them the coding language, and not just the coding language, but also the computational thinking skills, the lifelong component to it. We're wrapping that with career readiness, financial literacy. We're providing these students with housing, so we're taking them out of their environments and putting them in safe spaces, and we're giving them a living stipend as well. So the bet is, with the $50,000 investment, partially funded by workforce, foundations, and employers who say they're looking for the talent, I can create an early-stage engineer that is generating an income at least $62,500 a year on average, which is a high-growth job. And for every high-growth job that's created, there are 4 to 5 indirect jobs that are created from that as well. So we're in our second cohort of the program. We've now, because of the work, had Atlanta designated as a tech hire city. And what that means is we basically have a roundtable of all the stakeholders. We've got the employers, the large corporates, but also the high-growth startups at the table. We've got the training providers. We've got the students as well, and we've got the government. That's about to expand into a national partnership with the Iron Yard, the nation's largest coding school. We're about to embark on a $100 million expansion across 25 cities across the United States. And we've seen the outcomes of building that top of funnel. In the venture world, we look at the top of funnel. In workforce, we look at top of funnel. And if we're going to diversify, we've got to create the technical talent as early as possible. And we probably need to start before they get out of high school. Matter of fact, when they graduate high school, whether they go to college or not, they should be able to have a skill that they can get high, upwardly mobile employment. And we're starting to see some success with that on the ground in Atlanta.
Maybe to do a partnership with the King County Council.
Oh, I'm already linking up here.
Well, can I just say, I mean, what we have found, you got to get to these kids before they're, like 8th, 9th grade.
Exactly.
Because the drop-off after that is pretty steep. And this is why the work I think we're doing in the schools is going to be really important. I
mean, to that point real quick, I'm a product of Atlanta Public Schools, and Peter mentioned it. Now you've got 50% dropout rates. And then there's a Brookings report that says even when they graduate, the workforce is failing them. I think 80% of disconnected youth still can't find work. So we're now ideating with Atlanta Public Schools to take a cluster of a high school, middle school, and elementary schools, and how do we brand this as a tech and entrepreneurship ecosystem so that from K through 12, they're embracing the content, but also understanding how to acclimate and assimilate into the culture.
Interesting. You're going to lose complete control of this in a second, but I would. We saw from this Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences that particularly for girls, the decision that that STEM pursuits are not for them happens very, very early. That acculturation happens in really before they start kindergarten. So we're trying to figure out how to get way ahead of that,
Right.
because the opportunity that we have is in those areas. And if they are turned off by it, they're not going to have a chance to succeed.
And part of the, listen, it's all our parents' fault,
Sorry.
right? Because they all said, sorry. No, because our parents all said, no,
very
listen, every kid has to go to four-year college. And the fact is, you know, a quarter of the jobs that are being created in cities right now do not require a four-year college degree. Right. And so I think we have to change the culture early and get the influences, particularly in the inner city, for kids to be exposed to opportunities that don't necessarily, it doesn't preclude, but don't necessarily require a four-year college degree. And I think the younger we can begin to get these influences into these kids' lives, the more success we're going to have.
Okay, I just have to say one thing. I think that's true, but I think what we're talking about too
You all
is
get comfortable. We're not leaving for a while.
But, you know, the systems that we built over the last several decades don't work today because of the changing globalization, technology, automation. And so while I agree that we need to train kids earlier and people don't all necessarily need a four-year degree, we also have to be really nimble and know that what we're training today may not be what they need tomorrow. So it's not a spent in time. This is an iterative process, and I don't think our systems are set up for that kind of continuous training, and I think that needs to be built in as well.
Yes, maybe Cecilia, you can continue and tell us more about your initiative, Make It MSP.
Right.
Yes.
So our region for quite a while had too many people and not enough jobs, and now we have too many jobs and not enough people, which is a really good problem to have, but is a real problem nonetheless. And so if we can't fill the jobs, our companies that we have are going to move to where the talent is, and we're not going to be able to grow additional jobs if the talent isn't there. We've had companies say, love the Twin Cities, want to be there. I have 40 engineering jobs, total of 200 jobs, but if I can't fill those 40 engineering jobs, we're not coming. So a wake-up call for us, when our business investment folks are meeting with companies for the first time, they're bringing in my colleague, Peter Frosch, who actually is responsible for Make It MSP. But the genesis of it was acknowledging this talent issue that we had, and we convened a talent task force, which was chaired by two of our Fortune 500 CEOs, but also included the president of St. Thomas University, the head of social media for The Current, which is one of our radio stations from Minnesota Public Radio, and a broad group of folks. But then we also convened a makers group of 40 much younger people that were kind of in this new generation of workers that look a lot different than our board does, for example, in terms of race, where they came from, and the work that they do. And the research that we did showed similar things, that if we looked at professional workers, we were going to be about 100,000 workers short by 2020. Well, that's kind of tomorrow. And we also realized the data showed that for every professional job we created, the domino effect was 3.5 other jobs. So for a low-wage job that we would create, there really is no multiplier effect, and that's just the economics. So we knew that we needed to focus on professional talent, but we also had to make sure that it was aligned with the rest of the human capital pipeline, if you will. So making sure that we understood what was going on in K-12, higher ed, worker retraining. And as we did that, we realized that there was nobody working up here in terms of a talent retention and attraction program. So that's where we decided to focus. It isn't that the rest of that isn't important, but as an organization, we don't do workforce, we don't sell, we don't underwrite. We have a very specific mission, and we want to make sure that we're not overlapping what other folks are doing, but we're complementing what they're doing. So how do we do that? We convened, again, asset-based approach. We have a lot of Fortune 500s in our region. We have a lot of great companies with really skilled HR folks who had never gotten together to talk about this. And so we brought all these HR folks together and called it the HR Collaborative, and they discussed what their issues were in terms of recruiting and retaining talent. Some of the things they said is we're really good at selling our company. We don't really know how to sell our region to a new grad coming from Atlanta who doesn't know anything about this region. We also know that it's, there's Monster.com, there's all sorts of places that people can look for a job, but there's no one place that people can go in our region if they were interested, whether it's for the private sector or the public sector. So one of the things that came out of that was makeitmsp.org, which is an online platform that provides a recruiter's toolkit. So if you're trying to recruit a young grad, there's a 16-hour tour that's going to take you to all the breweries that we have, show you where all the bike paths are, et cetera. If you're trying to recruit kind of a mid-manager level, you know, this is where the schools are, this is the great park system, et cetera. But we also have an online job portal that scrubs about 90% of the jobs that are open in our region. So you can go on there and you can plug in and say, I'm looking for project management or an IT engineer, whatever it might be. And every job that is open in our region pops up. So again, it's kind of a one-stop shop. There's also a welcome letter from our region to folks. So, and it's signed by our board of directors, which again is a broad scope from across the 16 counties that say, you matter, and you're really important. Now, having said all that, that's all really great, but again, the process just continues to evolve. So one of our biggest challenges, for example, is attracting and retaining talent of color. So if General Mills, for example, is trying to recruit an African-American professional from another part of the country, and they walk in, they say, none of your C-suites look like me, your board doesn't look like me, there's not a lot of future here for me, I'm gonna go where I can find that. So we are really working to be intentional. We haven't figured this out yet about how we make sure that our region is inclusive and welcoming of everybody in a very genuine way. So there's the St. Paul Chamber, which is one of our key partners, got a grant from the Bush Foundation to really take a look at the affinity groups that we had in our region. Several affinity groups, none of them knew each other. So it's one last example. So one thing that we did was we decided, well, let's just have a party for all of our professionals of color and see what happened. Well, we had over 450 people show up. And anecdotally, we had 3 or 4 people say, I was gonna move because I couldn't find a community here that wasn't white from Finland. And now it's here. So it's kind of funny because we want a lot of diversity, but folks want to connect with one another as well. And so it's an interesting process, an interesting conversation that I think will continue to evolve as the initiative moves forward.
Thank you very much, Cecile. I think we're running out of time, and I would like absolutely to leave the chance for the audience to raise some questions. We can take 2 questions. There is a lady, blue there, over there.
Thank you. Helen Santiago Fink, I'm a climate urbanist. In terms of looking at post-Paris and inclusive and sustainable cities, it's important that economic growth is decoupled from environmental impact and resource utilization. What are your areas or your companies doing to move in that trajectory?
Yes, I think it's a generic question addressed to all. Maybe, yes, please.
So we're moving forward with a dramatic ramping up of our transit system and proposing a $54 billion increase to our light rail system, which will put it on a par with DC Metro, except with long-term maintenance built in from the start. And then redeploying a lot of that bus service to serve more people. We also just implemented low-income bus fare, the largest program of its kind in the country. Fundamentally, we have to provide people mobility within this 3-county area if they're going to be able to access opportunity, and relying on the automobile and the way in which the region has developed since World War II is simply not feasible. So seeking to remake the region, knitting together all the residential and economic centers and educational with transit that is highly efficient and gives people better opportunity throughout the region.
Thank you. Maybe Peter, you want
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very quick. You know, I'll say 2 things. We have a big focus on sustainable growth in cities, and I think we have, in fact, some of the skills work we're doing in New York, Detroit, Los Angeles, other cities is around green jobs to, you know, to rebuild some of the parks, dealing with the stormwater issues in a lot of these cities. These are actually creating jobs and opportunities, and I think that, you know, as Minneapolis has done a terrific job with this, is, you know, people want green spaces, and I think there is a very consistent and collaborative opportunity to parallel economic growth with sustainable growth, and I think it's got to continue to be a big area of focus.
I'm going to pick up another question. There is a gentleman over there.
Hi, my name is Jacob Mason. I'm with the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. I just wanted to piggyback on that question. We're talking about inclusive cities and growing cities. How do we make investments in transportation and accommodate growing populations without pushing the more vulnerable populations into peripheral areas where there is worse transportation and it's more difficult to access jobs, which the jobs that serve lower income populations tend to be more dispersed throughout the region and harder to serve with public transportation.
I will try to be very quick. Our region is experiencing the suburbanization of poverty. Thank you, Brookings. Ellen Berube right here. And it's, because we have this high income group that's doing very well, real estate prices go up, workers get pushed farther out. Three ways in which our transit investments are going to help with that. One, we connect the more affordable areas with the job centers. Two, we create the opportunity for housing to be built around that transit, which lowers the transportation costs for those folks. And three, it provides us the place where we can invest in housing that is permanently affordable, where the transportation will also be permanently affordable.
Can I just say one thing? It's really not a great MSP, but when I was at the City of St. Paul, I was the Planning and Economic Development Director for Mayor Coleman, who I'm sure will sign on as well. But when we did the Green Line, which is our new light rail line that connects the two cities, downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul, one of the challenges were the number of stops and where those stops were located. And in the poor part of St. Paul and Frogtown, there were very few stops. And I want to say, I think that's where kind of this long-term view comes in. So many years ago, or decades ago, when Interstate 94 was built, it kind of ripped through Rondo neighborhood, which was the African-American middle-class neighborhood, just wiped it out. So we learned from that. So philanthropy really started to fund advocacy organizations. So by the time we started talking about light rail, which was 30 years ago, and got to this point, we didn't have those three steps. No money, no political will to make that happen. Well, our advocacy organizations understood what their power was, and they actually accosted Peter Rogoff, apparently, in Washington, D.C., in a cafeteria line and demanded those three stops and why they were important to the economic growth of the region, and those stops came into being. I think ultimately this development along, TOD development along light rail and ensuring that there's housing for all and choices for all really only happens with intentional policy by elected officials, because the market's going to do what the market does. People want to make money. That's what our country's all about. But if we want to make sure there's a place for all, we really need to make sure that the pressure is on our elected officials to make sure that it is inclusive growth, that the zoning does provide for location of affordable housing, and that if there is a huge gap between the cost to do affordable housing along transit and not that gap get filled, to make sure that those folks don't get pushed out. Because if you keep pushing poverty out, your costs are just going to go up because you're going to have to create more transit, more housing options, more services, and then the provision of those services, which I think you've talked about, Dow, gets more difficult when you have to provide those in a much wider geography. So I really do think we're all in this together, but we really need support and leadership by our elected officials at the local level.
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick because this can be, we could spend 3 hours on this. I don't completely agree, because I actually think the reality, as population wants to be in urban areas, we're going to have to move the geographic boundaries, and we're going to have to really focus on how do you create neighborhoods that people want to live in terms of transportation and jobs and schools and green spaces. So I think we have to think more broadly about how you actually, this is a lot of the work we're doing in Detroit, how do you actually grow these neighborhoods? The core of cities are doing well. People want to live there, but people are going to be pushed out. Okay, that's just the reality of it, and I think we have to figure out, I absolutely think long-term, I don't think public officials can do it on their own. I think this is where you have to have a very collaborative approach among the business sector, the philanthropic sector, the nonprofit sector, and really focus on neighborhood development, and we could have a whole program just on that.
Thank you very much, Peter. We're gonna close the panel. Just one information is about the Inclusive Growth in Cities campaign. The next step, we have this meeting in Paris in November. In New York, we delivered the New York proposal, and I mentioned to you, the 4 axes of actions. In Paris, we're gonna produce the Paris Action Plan. So in the Paris Action Plan, actually, we're going to be more specific about the type of policies that we would like to promote, working with the offices of these 50 mayors. And the discussion today actually is going to inform us and give us ideas on how to develop this very, very specific policy action. So I would like to thank you very much.